This is the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast.
To the ground. I sat down behind this log with my camera recording. Maybe 5 minutes, 6 minutes after I sat down, sure as hell, whatever this thing is I can hear it start working its way down the hill, kind of going back and forth closer to me. And I'm sitting there thinking, all right, this is it. And it's waited until it got as close as I could. It sounded like it was as close as it could be. And I just jumped up and I sprinted up the hill towards the sound with my camera, and there was nothing.
In the moment, what I thought was a big cat stalking me out of the woods. And then, as it got down to just before seeing it, thinking it was a person because of hearing the actual footfalls. And then when I finally did stand up, at first I didn't see it, and then all of a sudden, what the heck is that? Thinking it was a black bear because it was squatted down. And then when it stood up, it stood and turned and looked in my direction. I saw the ear at the side of its head and the flat face side profile. And it turned and looked at me, and seeing it in broad daylight was absolutely the most amazing experience you could ever have.
So Alex, welcome to the podcast, man. I'm super excited to have you on. Thank you for taking time out to come on here and chat with me. And before we get into, one of my favorite subjects, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, I'm really interested in you as a person because you've done so many cool things. You're a filmmaker. You also have done a ton of backpacking, hiking. You're always seem to be out there exploring, which to me is like near and dear to my heart. So before we get into the fun stuff, how did you get into this? Like outdoors? Have you always been an outdoorsman, or is this just something that you fell into over time?
Yeah, I'd like to think that I've always been kind of an outdoors person. Ever since I was a kid, I was actually born in South Africa, which is a pretty wild place. My family's not originally from there. They ended up moving there from Yugoslavia, which is a country that no longer exists as it was falling apart. So I was in South Africa for a few years. I don't really remember a whole lot, but I like to think that maybe it's the wildness of that place. I was apparently running around, in the village barefoot all the time and with all the other kids and kind of doing that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of animals and things around there. And from South Africa, we moved to New York City of all places, which I remember as a kid, exploring the parks. And my favorite place in the entire city was the Museum of Natural History. Whenever I'm in New York now, I still make it a point to go there because that was nature in this, urban jungle. I'm not a city guy. It's not really a secret. So I'm not a huge fan of New York. And I remember those times, just like I said, going to the museum and the zoo. And I remember it in kind of pre-K and kindergarten, they used to call me Nature Boy, and I would apparently hide. I would hide on the playground, and when recess was over and they had to come and find me, and I got in trouble a lot. I remember for that. So when I was a kid, after we were in New York City for years, I moved up to New England, and we came up to New Hampshire, and I've been living in the New England area pretty much ever since. And New Hampshire, it's the second most forested state in the country. I remember hugging the trees when I got here, and there was woods and all this other kind of stuff. So I kind of grew up in and out of the woods and just having fun outside as any kid should. At least I think that's a good way to grow up. And then as I got older, I started getting into more hiking and camping and that sort of stuff. I did some survival training and naturalism training as well in high school and afterwards. And then I started doing a lot of solo backpacking as well as just backpacking in general up here in New Hampshire specifically. I spent a few years doing the New Hampshire 48 4,000 footers. So for folks not from here, there are 48 peaks that are above the 4,000 foot mark. And there's some pretty rough and rugged terrain. You ask anyone who's done the whole Appalachian Trail, New Hampshire in particular has some pretty tough peaks. It's a very rugged section, probably some of the most rugged mountains east of the Rockies. So yeah, I just kind of got into that. And I was always interested in Bigfoot and cryptozoology ever since I was a kid. I was on a ski trip and up in the mountains, and my dad told me the story of the Yeti, and actually kind of gifted me this Yeti figurine. I still have it. It was a shadow box, very high quality kind of figure. Of course, it went through a lot with kids. So it's definitely got some war wounds and it has fingers missing, but it's what kind of inspired me. But it came with this little scroll that I don't have anymore that told the legend of the Yeti, something about the setting with the mountains and knowing that this thing could be out there. It had me hooked. So from when I was a kid, I was just watching documentaries, started reading a lot of the books. When I was in high school, there was a lot of the blogs going on, Crypto Mundo, Lauren Coleman, a lot of these people. So later on in life, after getting out of school, studying communications, kind of doing digital media stuff, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to start doing documentaries about cryptozoology, whether it be the Loch Ness Monster, and it's primarily been Bigfoot up to this point, but I've done quite a few other topics as well. So it's sort of a good way to combine. I think people who are into cryptozoology, generally, you're outside, right? They like to be outdoors, and it's tough to be one in a city. And, there are plenty of people that live in cities that are into this stuff, but if you want to actually go research, obviously you have to go to some natural spots. So I like to think that both the filmmaking, the cryptozoology, and the love of the outdoors really complement each other, especially with these subjects.
Yeah, man, it's so funny because I feel like I don't have a similar upbringing in the fact of like I didn't move across the world to come live in New Hampshire, but I have been to New Hampshire, and speaking of the Appalachian Trail, I did do the Appalachian Trail, and it's right so like that stuff's life changing, man. You don't have to be in the woods for 6 months. You can be out in the woods for a couple of days or a week at a time, and it just changes your life. And I have the same kind of thing with as you were talking about a little bit about how like. It's just like, to me, it's almost a compulsion to be outdoors. Like, that's what I'm always doing. As soon as I get off work, I'm either like talking about the outdoors, hitting the outdoors. Anytime I go on vacation, all outdoors oriented. And so the filmmaking background, documentaries are daunting. And, I have never made like a full feature length documentary at this point because like, this is all relatively new to me. Within the last probably 5 to 7 years, I really got into like video, audio, all that stuff, and it's really intriguing. So obviously you've put out hours and hours and hours and hours of videos, and prior to the Bigfoot stuff, I actually saw, you put out this documentary about the lions of the East. What was the inspiration for that? Because that's technically, I guess you could say cryptozoology, but like those are creatures we know exist 100%. So how did you get like super interested in that topic to make that film?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have the, not to plug it, but I have the DVD just sitting right back here, Lions of the East. It's really cool cover artwork done by my buddy.
It's a great, I watched it. It's great. It's great stuff, man.
Thank you. Yeah. No. So that's one of those topics that I think fits into cryptozoology, but also it's a bit of a bridge to normal zoology, just, kind of regular biology and zoology, because people know they exist. But there's this interesting phenomenon where in the Eastern United States, in particular New England, that's where the documentary focused on, they're treated like if people are saying they saw Bigfoot, right? You saw a mountain lion. Oh, they're not supposed to be here. There's this really weird conspiracy kind of thing, and a huge distrust going on between Fish and Game, the authorities, let's say, and the public. And I've doing a lot of Bigfoot docs. Like I said, I'm interested in cryptozoology. So there's other cryptids. Champ is a really big one. I've really been interested of Lake Champlain, which is kind of America's Loch Ness, as well as Loch Ness, but what happened was doing all these Bigfoot docs in the meantime. And what I like about the Bigfoot documentaries is it's never ending. You can go to any different state or place in North America pretty much and have stories, and you could extrapolate from there. Whereas when you get to Champ or something a little bit more specific, there's one area you can do it. But mountain lions was similar, and it kept happening at events, whether it be Bigfoot events or paranormal related events, where I'd have a booth or I'd be speaking across New England and across the East Coast. I'd heard a lot of mountain lion stories. People, well, I've never seen Bigfoot, but I saw this black mountain lion, or I saw 3 mountain lions, all these kind of crazy stories all the time. They were almost some of the most common things that were reported, especially in New England. So I was like, I'm going to kind of look at that. I've always heard of the big cat phenomenon over in the UK and Australia, as well as here. And about 2 years, so right before COVID is when the documentary came out. I spent about 2 years working on it, just talking to people all across the New England states, whether it be eyewitnesses, amateur researchers, biologists, people that work with the states. So Fish and Game people, game wardens, environmental police, that sort of stuff, all kinds of folks. And that was kind of the culmination of that. And I think it's it's similar because it has a lot of overlap with the Bigfoot phenomenon, the way that people, they report these things and they either get downplayed or then other people who've had experiences will say, well, I've had this happen. And they kind of form a coalition and say, well, the authorities are withholding information, and the authorities are saying, well, we're not really, but, we're dealing with our funding, and, it's always comes down to money. So it's a very complicated topic, but it draws a lot of interest. I mean, I hear people say, oh, the mountain lion topic is cool. The Bigfoot stuff, it's not legit, but let's talk about mountain lions. So to each their own. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff, obviously, with Bigfoot and other cryptids as well. But it was definitely an interesting kind of switch up, because you're dealing with something that is a known animal. It's just coming back to its original areas that it inhabited, and it's precedented. It's happened before. You had, especially in the film, talked about the Connecticut lion. I remember actually that's one of the reasons I kind of revisited it. I was in Connecticut for school back in 2011, and I remember hearing that mountain lion got struck by a car and killed. And then later on, while I was working on Lions of the East, coincidentally, I happened to meet a police officer at a paranormal convention in New Hampshire who happened to have seen that same mountain lion a few days before it crossed that road a few miles from where it happened. He was on patrol. He saw it. Nobody believed him. A couple of days later, there was a mountain lion dead in the street, and he was one of the only ones that had his sighting confirmed. So a lot of kind of interesting synchronicities like that. But it was definitely an interesting change up. And like I said, I think it fits well within cryptozoology, but it's also something that has a broader audience, let's say, than Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. People who aren't into cryptozoology can very easily look at this topic, and maybe that'll get them interested in other things and say, well, let's look at this Bigfoot topic and let's see, is there any validity to it, or is it all just a bunch of BS? So
yeah, absolutely. So the hiking of the 48 highest peaks up there really interests me too, because I love doing stuff like that. What was like kind of your inspiration to do that? Because that's a big undertaking. That's not like, it sounds like, oh, that sounds like a fun thing. Like that's 4,000 feet of elevation, especially on the East Coast of the US, where it's just like really poorly maintained switchbacks, basically, if any ever. I mean, not
straight
switchbacks, just like straight up and
yeah.
down. Yeah, my bad. It's not as easy as it sounds. So what was the inspiration for that? Because that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always heard of people doing it, and I'd done obviously hiking back in the day, and I did some section hikes down south, especially when I was doing my kind of survival training. We did. Oh man, must have been a couple 100 miles in between Tennessee and North Carolina, right in November, right as the snow started coming down. I remember we did 2.5 weeks, and it was just snowing pretty much the whole time. We were in snow. So, it was pretty intense. We had to have gear that was all handmade, handcrafted baskets and capotes and all this kind of stuff. And I've done some other hiking there, and the odd mountain in New Hampshire, of course, Mount Kearsarge, Mount Monadnock, a lot of the famous peaks in New Hampshire just had done kind of grown up. I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of the kind of the grueling hikes, but I just decided to challenge myself. And one of my buddies had just started doing it. And he was like, hey man, you want to maybe hike this with me? I'm like, oh, absolutely. I just fell in love with it. Fell in love with the views, obviously seeing parts of New Hampshire that you go on some of these popular mountains, of course, a lot of people get to see those views, but some of the more difficult mountains to get to, remote terrain, not a lot of people are in there. You don't see a lot of people in some of these hikes, and doing them in every time of day and condition possible. I mean, one of my favorite types of hiking is sunrise hiking, basically waking up at 3 a.m., get there for the sunrise, get the whole mountain yourself, and you get views that you just can't see at 3 p.m. or at noon when most people are up there on the mountains. So it was just a great way to learn more about the state and how rugged it actually is and how many of these mountains are there. That was probably one of my biggest kind of undertakings, where it was, every weekend back 2-3 years ago, almost every weekend we were up there hiking a mountain or 2 or 3 or 4 in the same weekend, or trying to do a semi-PEMI loop and get 4 mountains in a row, or hit a bunch of other mountains and backpack and camp out there. So it was just a great time to really experience the White Mountains, which was already one of my favorite places to be. I did a lot of Bigfoot research up in that area prior to that, and have always kind of grown up going back and forth from there. But so it just kind of, it felt natural to do it. And I don't know if you can be a New Hampshire adventurer and not do the 48 at least. So
it's that New Hampshire is some of the most beautiful country I've ever seen in my life. And I used to volunteer for this program out here, and I'm out of Northwest Ohio. So like we're pretty far away and pretty much the exact opposite of New Hampshire in landscape. But I've been up a lot of the touristy peaks, and it's just, I think that people who haven't been to these places, when you're talking about Bigfoot research or you're talking about even mountain lions or anything, I don't think people that are like not outdoors people that go there understand this, but people that have never been somewhere like that don't understand the vastness and the scale of these landscapes. It's you're standing on top of Mount Washington, you turn and do a 360 view if it's visible, and it's just woods forever.
Yeah.
And Maine is like 90% coverage of woods.
Yeah. Like, #1 forested. Yeah.
Yeah. Like anything could be living out there. It's insane. So, Bigfoot, let's just get after it. I know you have many of interest in the paranormal and cryptid world or whatever, but how you seem to be very directed with Bigfoot, at least recently. Yeah. Is that like your main interest, or is that just kind of fallen into place because of the small town monsters, and that's kind of like the part that you're sort of like in charge of, from what I can gather of just looking at things? But like the Beyond the Trail series is amazing, and you guys do awesome stuff. So how did the beginnings of this Bigfoot search happen? Because you don't just get a show of it like one day you wake up. You have to have some experience, obviously. So where did you get your kind of foothold? Yeah,
I'd say Bigfoot is probably my favorite pursuit within cryptozoology. Although my favorite cryptid is Champ, to be fair. I love the stories of Lake Champlain and everything. And when I first started doing the documentaries back in 2015, I actually was, after I got out of school, I was traveling a little bit over in Europe, where my family's from, and spent some time kind of going around. And I actually went to Scotland, and of course went to Loch Ness and did a documentary on Loch Ness Monster. But as soon as I got back to the US, I said, hey, I want to look into the New Hampshire and the New England Bigfoot stories. You don't hear a lot about them on the national radar. There's plenty. I mean, I have at least, I'm literally updating my sightings database every day. I've got 50 plus reports just from New Hampshire that I've heard or been told directly, or emails. People send me the reports, which I love because we're gathering data. So it was after I did the Loch Ness film, 2015, 16, I started kind of going on Facebook and finding some of these groups like Squatchachusetts and BFRO and Bigfoot people in this area. And I started interviewing people. I actually ended up meeting a guy up in the White Mountains who's become a friend, a Native American researcher up there, and the kind of way he approaches it. And I spent a whole summer basically going up there every weekend, driving up there, going researching in this area and just kind of checking it out and spending time in the woods. And I started a YouTube channel called Sasquatch Out of the Shadows. And I still do stuff on that channel now. I have a live stream on there. But the Bigfoot stuff, immediately, what I kind of was, at first, I wanted to be more of a filmmaker and say, well, I just want to go and tell people stories, right? Look at what they're saying, the experiences, supposed evidence. But then I got just addicted to being in the field. So aside from the filmmaker stuff, I try to be a due diligence and be an amateur scientist as well, and document what's going on. And if I have my own evidence or anything like that, and I've now have my own research area here in New Hampshire that kind of fell into my lap, and that's a whole other story. But so the documentaries really started. I wanted to do a feature documentary about Bigfoot. And I said, there's already been so much of that. Why not just put out interviews of eyewitnesses, fully uninterrupted, maybe throw some B-roll in, that's it. But just throw out the interviews. And I started putting those on YouTube, and then they became short documentaries, and it kind of became open-ended. I said, I could do this pretty much anywhere I go. I can find Bigfoot stories and find a witness. If I'm going on a trip somewhere for other reasons, I can maybe do some Bigfoot stuff on the side and find a witness interview and put the interview up on the channel. And that's where that kind of took off from. And, as I became friends with Seth Breedlove over at Small Town Monsters, we'd actually been talking about doing some kind of project together, and he had me do a series called On the Trail of Champ, which was about the Lake Champlain monster, of course. And that was funny. That kind of kicked off the whole On the Trail series. And that was, as I mentioned, about Champ, the lake monster. Wasn't Bigfoot related, but it's been kind of funny working over the years on some of the other Small Town Monsters productions, primarily on the Trail of Bigfoot, where we're kind of doing what we're doing a little bit on Beyond the Trail, but we take it a step further and Beyond the Trail. But we started going out in the woods, we like On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey, right, which we filmed a couple of years ago in the Adirondacks, showing what that region is like. And I liked what you said earlier about, people who don't really go out in these areas, it can be hard if you spend your time in suburban or urban areas to know how much woods there truly is out there. I mean, my family's originally from Europe, Eastern Europe, and I didn't grow up hunting or anything, but like I said, just growing up in a state like New Hampshire, you're exposed to the woods all the time. You're going out there and picking up snakes and doing all that kind of stuff. So I love being able to show that to folks that maybe didn't have that kind of an upbringing or just aren't really exposed to that in their day-to-day life. And then the Beyond the Trail of thing that kind of started this past year in 2021, Beyond the Trail, where the idea was, we're going to take the On the Trail of Bigfoot format, but go one step further. It's going to be us out there in the woods. We're going to really go into some of these areas. And I love going to some super remote locations. I love knowing that there's that feeling of danger where you really have to rely on yourself. And that's something I learned during, kind of survival training days and especially hiking the 48. I mean, if you're up there and you twist an ankle and you're 10 miles in, it's tough. You really have to rely on yourself and the people with you, and you have to have trust with them and they have to trust you, and it has to be reciprocal. And that's the idea with a lot of Bigfoot research. And I started talking to, researchers that are way more knowledgeable than me, that have been out there for years, and techniques and all that kind of stuff. And when I go to a new region, like if I go to Colorado or Washington, I'm not just going to go there and assume I know everything. I want to talk to the local researchers. I want to talk to a local biologist, people who know about that area and the flora and the fauna, and have them tell me where might be a good spot to go, or even better yet, have them take us to their spots, or kind of do that sort of stuff. So yeah, the Bigfoot stuff has definitely been the biggest, I'd say, and I'm sure will continue to be. As I mentioned, North America is just blessed with this mystery, in my opinion, of undiscovered hominid, man-beast, anthropoid kind of thing that seems to be on the landscape and pretty much in all habitats. So it's been a super awesome journey.
Well, one of the things that I really enjoy about your particular style of these Bigfoot documentaries, because like there's only so many, you know what I mean? Like there's the ones that we've all seen going back to like the 70s. And then
Right.
you got the Patterson-Gimlin film, obviously, which has been taught. You can find somebody who doesn't even understand what Bigfoot is, and you say Patterson-Gimlin film, and they're like, oh yeah, I saw that on Discovery
That
Channel.
one's making the walk. Yeah.
Yeah. So like every time I see a new one pop up on social media or something, I watch it. I just can't help myself. But the one thing I really enjoy about your specific style is like you guys are out there doing it, and it's very like you have the interviews with like the people who have the bigger names and all this stuff. They go out with you, but you're out there, you and your team are out there looking in person, filming it yourselves. And I think that's really important, because a lot of the ones I've watched in the past, it's just interviews with some B-roll, like you said earlier. Right. It's kind of just like, this guy saw a Bigfoot, and then there's like a recreation with a guy in a Bigfoot suit, and then there's a little bit of B-roll. But you guys do like the full Monty, and I think that's really important because it like brings you into like what you do in your life. And one of the things that really interested me, I think it's almost in every episode you've put out to date, are these like pheromone chip stuff. And you guys are always basically like gagging on camera, like, oh my God, are they really that disgusting? Like, how would you describe the smell of this pheromone chip? And then after that, like, where does this come from? Like, how do they do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to address your kind of first point, I mean, I don't think that Bigfoot is just all over the place in people's backyards. And, there are certainly very many properties in North America that seem to have activity, and whether it's people living in rural areas or right at the edge of civilization where these things come and interact. I mean, I know people who have stuff going on, but you go to some of these remote places and it's just amazing to be able to showcase the kind of ecological diversity that's going on there. I always try to make a point to show there's moose evidence or other wildlife in the area. But some of the research techniques, obviously an interesting one is the pheromone chips. So pheromone chips, basically, if I had to sum up the smell, oh man, it's the worst gym bag smell you can imagine, with dirty, smelly underwear just thrown in. It's rough. It is really, really bad. And I actually didn't really know when I first saw some a few years ago. Somebody kind of stuck my nose in the jar. It sticks with you. It's a haunting smell. It's actually, it's developed using gorilla and human vaginal bacterial odors during certain time periods. So It's very, very rough. And how it was put together was actually a professor, Dr. Greg Bambanek, out in Minnesota, who works with a guy named Doug Hychek, who used to produce that show Monster Quest. And he's one of my favorite researchers. He's like my go-to guy when I have questionable evidence or anything. I talk to him. He's been around. He knows what he's doing. He asked Greg to develop this pheromone chip. Basically, the idea is, we all give off pheromones, whether we know it or not. Animals have usually stronger ones. I mean, if especially if they're trying to get mates or whatever, but we have it subconsciously as well. You don't know if you're attracted to somebody, it's their pheromones. At a lot of times that are, there's some kind of a connection going on there that's more than just, visual or whatever, or emotional. There is chemistry, there's science going on there when you meet somebody that might catch your eye.
That's why I don't wear deodorant.
Release the musk, right? Yeah. So yeah, people basically, they give these off, and animals do as well. So the idea is, well, hey, why not take stuff because we don't know what these things are. Sasquatch, is it closer to a gorilla, closer to humans? The debate continues to rage. So why not take the best of both and kind of put that into something that's tangible and put it out there, see if we can't have any results. So Doug had talked to Greg and asked him to put together that. And Greg Bambanek, his nickname is Dr. Juice. He's got a hunting and fishing lure company. So he makes hunting and fishing lures for, if you're going elk hunting or certain types of fishing, natural smells that attract those types of animals that people are looking for. So we're just extending it to Sasquatch. I believe the first time they used it was the Skookum expedition in the early 2000s. And, some researchers have had success with them. Some haven't. We maybe have had success with them. We don't know. We've had strange things happen, but we've put them to the test in quite a few different locations, and some places I don't think they've been used before in terms of research. So it was definitely interesting to use those. And man, I got to tell you, when I'm traveling with those, especially if I'm checking the suitcase, I have to, the jar that they're in does nothing to hold the smell in. It is so potent. And if you hold them with your hands, that smell will be on there for hours. So whenever we're handling them, even with gloves on, we have some spray or some soap or something ready to clean right away, get that smell off, because a lot of people gag. A lot of people just think it's absolutely putrid, and it is. And to package it, I basically had put the jar inside of another jar and then double Ziploc bag it. And that seems to do well with keeping the smell in there, because I don't want to exploding in my suitcase, because that stuff probably never getting that smell out at that rate. So they're fun. I mean, they're great. And I think it's a serious tool for research. And a lot of people say, but Sasquatch are not gorillas and they're not humans, so it's not going to work. And people will always find a way to poo-poo anything in the Sasquatch community, and everyone's always critical, knocking each other down. But we don't know if we don't try, so we're just kind of giving it a try. We try many other techniques. That's just one of the ones, and a lot of folks I've talked to have had some levels of success, some interest. So the idea is you're trying to bring something in that might be curious. It's probably going to realize, it's coming from that bright orange thing on the tree, but hey, you're still bringing something in, so why not give it a try?
And it's the way you guys are approaching this, in my opinion, is very much the way it should be approached, because it's like, why beat a dead horse? If things aren't working, that's literally the scientific process, is just going through and figuring out, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try this. Let's try this. Let's try this. So what if you want to play bass at 3 a.m., just go for it, dude. Like whatever you have to do to make stuff work, I think is really cool. And yeah, I've learned my lesson the hard way. I'm not a Bigfoot podcast. I mean, I'm just like an outdoors guy, and I love this topic. Like, it's just super interesting to me. And I just putting out literally like 4 episodes with Bigfoot, I've already had to deal with like what you guys are always calling the Bigfoot community. And it's like, dear Lord, I want nothing
mess.
to do with this full time.
You don't,
I
really don't.
Can't imagine the basically shit show you guys deal with on a daily basis, but we won't give them much room in this podcast because I don't really care. But one of the things that I really think that is cool, like the whole group of people that you guys are around, I just kind of met you guys at random because I had Connor on my show last year, and cool. Then I had Emily, and now I have you on here, and you guys all approach this from such a logical, thought out you're not just going out in the woods and getting drunk and throwing stuff around and yelling, and there's a thought behind it, and I think that's really important, and I think that's what turns a lot of people off in in the Bigfoot world is like you start throwing in all this like really wild stuff that just kind of like the average person doesn't like logically compute, like flying in spaceships and stuff and whatever. Like, you know, who's to say I don't know shit about anything, but it's that turns people off because then it starts getting to like X-Files territory. It's like,
right.
So what's your overall philosophy on Bigfoot? That's not to say that, you know, you're 100% this or that. Like, what do you feel if Bigfoot exists? What do you think this creature is?
Yeah, that's always the golden question. And, you know, over the years, there's been a lot of interesting theories postulated about what it could be and whether or not it exists. Of course, I lean much more towards the camp that it is real based on my experiences and just the sheer amount of people at this point. I mean, probably hundreds of people in the 200 range, at least for people I've talked to face to face over the years with sightings and experiences and, you know, let alone emails and, as I mentioned, sighting database and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of different camps in the Bigfoot world. Some people think it's, you know, a complete flesh and blood animal that's just like any other. Others think it's paranormal, perhaps multidimensional, extraterrestrial. You're right. You mentioned a little bit of that. So there's a lot of division and people don't get along even within individual camps. But I personally lean more towards it probably being I like the idea of convergent evolution. So, you know, we as humans developed in a certain way, basically off the land. I mean, abusing the land, let's say, for you know, kind of, we don't live with the land like a moose does. We live kind of separate from it. We're not really part of it, at least most groups of humans, especially now in the modern age. Correct. 200 years ago, most of human society was a lot closer to the land. Wherever you go, regardless of where you were in the world, it was like that. And, you know, modernization. But I like convergent evolution. Some sort of a, not an early man, but something related to us in between. So chimps are the closest living relative we have, at least that we know of, right? And yeah, I think that Sasquatch probably fits somewhere in there a little closer towards us. A lot of people get really caught up on this. Oh, Bigfoot's not an ape. It's a human. It's another type of human. The way that they behave and the traits they have and the anecdotal evidence we have, as well as some of the footprints and other examples of evidence that we have, it doesn't seem to act the way a human being does. It's very different, extremely physically capable compared to us, especially in the woods. Even humans that are super adapted to living in the woods don't seem to hold a candle up to these things that people say they're almost gliding through the woods as they're going through. You can imagine if you thousands of years basically evolving to live in a particular environment, you would be the absolute master. You know, we have animals that do master the woods, but nothing seems as well as what Sasquatch is purported to be. So I do lean more towards it being some sort of something. You know, maybe we don't know exactly what the designation is. There's been theories in the past that it could have been Gigantopithecus, which was one of the largest apes that ever existed. And I think a lot of people have shied away from that theory, myself included. That just seems to be more closely related to the orangutan in the pongid family. This thing seems to be a lot more, bipedal. So there's that characteristic, and that seems to be closer to human beings. So the missing link is kind of a cheesy term. It's not really used anymore scientifically. The idea that, you know, you go from one to the other, gorilla to human, and there's one in between, and that's what Bigfoot would be. No, turns out, you know, we have so many different ancestors in so many different places that the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, the Denisovans, the Dragon Man recently found in China, all these different apes and human-like creatures. So I think that Sasquatch is probably something a little bit closer to us without it obviously being completely human, and could have more ape traits, you know, as in other apes, because we are the only ape that is bipedal, and we do a lot of things differently than the other three sort of ape categories that are out there today. So, yeah, and so it's a tough question, but yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say thank you, because everybody told me I'd never use my anthropology degree, and here we are. I just understood everything you just said, so that was beautiful. And yeah, so I think filmmaker lecturing anthropologists, how's that? How does that compute?
Yeah, I think that's really true, and like, it's a very good point you made from a biological and evolutionary standpoint. Because one of my favorite ways to explain to someone who doesn't understand or want to understand evolution is, okay, if you were to take a high-speed trip back in time and there was a line of all of your ancestors in like a perfect row, and you just got to see their face for 1 second. I think they said it was some Richard Dawkins thing. Like, if you went back 1,000 years a second or something, you would never notice that it was it strayed from human to more like ape-like features over time. And by the time the train or whatever you're on stopped, and you'd look at like something, you'd be like, that's a gorilla.
Right.
But every time a species mates or whatever and has an offspring, there's a slight change. And if you make that change over millions and millions and millions of years, no matter how minuscule, that's how we came from fish crawling out of the ocean to being humans. Like if you went back in time far enough, your closest ancestor would be a fish. And that's just like, that's the part. And I don't think it's unreasonable. And I say this on every Bigfoot episode I've done. If there's a cryptid that exists, it's Bigfoot.
Right.
I can't say I have done no research on like the Loch Ness or Lake Champlain monster, anything like that. But Bigfoot, I spent a lot of time in the woods, man. And we as people walk on trails.
Exactly.
So there's 10 billion acres to the left and right that you never are going to see. And the only people that are out there are like loggers or biologists or like the vastness of the wilderness, back to what I said earlier. But anyway, this is, we went down a rabbit hole.
I mean, if I could just tack on to that a little bit, you say that and it's true. You look at, as I mentioned just a few hundred years ago, how much more closely we lived to the land. A lot more people were farming. There were mountain men. There were still a lot of indigenous tribes in North America that were roaming around, utilizing the land. Now, their farming is down. Everything's, corporate owned, huge companies, all this kind of stuff. There's less people in the woods, people moving out of rural areas to urban areas. So there's less and less people out there, and the woods keep expanding in these areas. I mean, states in New England especially have gone from being almost completely deforested 200, 300 years ago to now being some of the most densely forested places in the country. I mean, Maine alone hosts up to 70,000 moose, and they're an animal that is probably, if not the same size, bigger than Sasquatch in most cases. And, I run into moose all the time, even in southern New Hampshire in my areas. And it's amazing to see these animals. And just because there's homes nearby, there's still viable habitat that they move in and out of. And something I find interesting is that in no point in history has there ever been, as long as apes or primates have been around, there hasn't been one singular primate that's kind of controlled or been around, right? Even today, we still have our relatives, the gorillas, the chimps, and orangutans, among many other lesser primates, so monkeys and everything along those lines. But you look at human beings and how we are distributed across the globe in almost any environment you can imagine. I mean, I get amazed in the places some people live, from the absolute brutal tundras of Siberia to scorching hot climates. So what if you took an ape that was, because you have gorillas and chimps and orangutans, they're very localized, right? You can't take a gorilla, you can take them to zoos and areas and with extreme care. You can't just plop them off in rural New Hampshire or Montana. They won't survive very long. They're very specified. They live in a certain area, and that's what they've adapted to. So they can't kind of go out of that. But what if you take an ape that has the ability to adapt, that basically only needs a formula of food, water, and tree cover, and you have tons of habitat in North America and in all over Eastern Europe and into Asia as well. And that's where a lot of these reports come from. Another thing that really interests me is these reports that come out of Eastern Europe and Russia, Siberia, into China, where you have the stories of the Yeren and the Almasties, and in the Caucasus, which are the areas where we found a lot of early humans or Neanderthal evidence, the Denisovans. And you have sightings going back of these kind of hairy creatures even seen using tools. Could these have been examples of creatures that survived? The Neanderthals, like what I really like about the stories of ogres and trolls in Scandinavia in these faraway mountains is possibly these were Neanderthals that in certain groups managed to survive much longer, and to the point where you have some missionaries or people moving through the mountains, and they come across these beings with clubs that are a lot more physically bulky than most humans, especially with diets back then. People were a lot smaller than they are today. The troll and the ogre. So you think about it, and you have stories like Homo florensis, the Hobbit in Indonesia, tribal stories that go back hundreds of years, Dutch colonists seeing these things. Then you have the discoveries of these miniature-sized people, and some claim they still live, a few islands away. And what we have is the orang pendek, and it's been cited, as I mentioned, by Dutch colonists back in the time. The tribes all talk about them, had tons of modern sightings, and these in environments that are so incredibly dense that host host tigers, Sumatran tigers, rhinos, elephants, the orangutan itself. So really great habitats. So, Sasquatch seems to be something that's very well adapted to North America in general. And there's sightings of creatures like that in South Africa. There's obviously, as I mentioned, Eastern Europe, primarily Russia and into Asia, China, and they have the Yeren. There's stories going back centuries in China, but seems to be the case is always the same. They're remote areas, whether they be swamps like we have down south where there aren't any mountains, but there's extremely impenetrable swamps where everything's trying to kill you. And then you have mountain ranges across the U.S. and the sightings all come from these areas. They don't come from Brooklyn. They don't come from downtown San Francisco unless it's somebody pulling a joke. The really credible stuff seems to come from clusters. And if you, and I'll end my rambling in a second, but if you look at a map of rainfall in the U.S. and then overlay that with forestation as well as how many sightings there are across the U.S., it almost completely matches up perfectly. And we know apes need a certain amount of rainfall to live because they live in wooded environments. So the Pacific Northwest, where you have the temperate rainforest that has the highest density of Sasquatch sightings basically anywhere in the country, Washington, British Columbia, Oregon, and Northern California. Then you have the Rockies. You have down south and up and down the East Coast, the Appalachians, up into New England. That's where the other majority of sightings are because you have these environments that are, as I mentioned, getting more and more wild by the day. In the Midwest, they seem to taper off. There's not as much viable habitat. So it's very interesting that, if this is some sort of a projection thing that people are having, why are we not seeing them in all these other urban areas or places where if it's just all in our heads, you'd imagine there'd be widespread sightings elsewhere.
And that brings me to a good point. I always want to ask, because I'm from Ohio, is why is there like a disproportionate amount in the Midwest area-ish of Bigfoot sightings in Ohio, specifically Southern Ohio? I mean, up by me, there's like nothing. I mean, because it's just all cornfields and stuff. But Southern Ohio gets gnarly. It's really hilly. It's basically the foothills of the Appalachians. There's tons of forests down there. So I would assume that has something to do with it. But from like your perspective, why Ohio?
You kind of just answered the question there with that description of the area. No, I'd love to get more into it. We actually just filmed a recent Beyond the Trail in Ohio that's going to be coming out later. I think actually early next year, end of this year. But Ohio was one of the first states really that broke the mold of the Pacific Northwest is where Bigfoot is. Because a lot of people even 10, 15 years ago, or even recently would have said, hey, Bigfoot, it exists, but only in Washington State or California, right? Where that footage was filmed, the PGF film. It's not it couldn't be here. So Ohio is one of those states that kind of broke that mold. You have sightings going back 60s, 70s, even earlier, supposedly, stories of settlers even having experiences with strange things. That's true. Seems to be true across the East Coast, by the way. There's sightings in New England going back. I mean, I just was told recently of a sighting very close to my research area in 1895 of a gorilla that scared a bunch of boys while they were out hunting. And it was, there was a whole chase that ensued. So, kind of interesting. But back to the Ohio thing. North. So basically, it's kind of that whole eastern part of Ohio, right? And Southern Ohio in particular, you've got Salt Fork, all that area, but you have Kokoston, the kind of the so-called Sasquatch triangle that's existed there. And you had researchers like Don Keating in the 90s looking into the stories that most people were ignoring because they were like, hey, Bigfoot's out in the Pacific Northwest, but Ohio put Bigfoot more on a national map that said, hey, there are other places that have stuff going on. And, the BFRO was basically founded in Ohio and by Matt Moneymaker. And he's very controversial to some. People have a very love-hate relationship with the BFRO. I totally get it, but I know plenty of BFRO people and I think they're great. But, they were started basically in Ohio. So there's a lot that Ohio has contributed. And we spent time recently in a place called Minerva, Ohio, which was featured in one of Small Time Monsters' first documentaries, where there's just a long history of sightings. And we spent time in the terrain there. And I'd been down to Salt Fork in the past and camped in that area. And I knew there was tons of old growth trees, much more so than there is even here in New England. Just you come across these oaks and these trees that are just absolutely so thick around. It's incredible. I'm glad to see that. But, Eastern Ohio, like you mentioned, getting into Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is another big place for sightings, but the area we were in, it's rural. It's a lot of farmland, and you have these large patches of woods that will connect to other patches of woods. So it's not contiguous forest like it is here in New Hampshire or in Vermont or Maine or Washington or California, wherever. but it's these kind of patchy woods that lead into state parks and other areas, and these passages that other animals traverse through, bears and deer, of course, food sources and that sort of stuff. So yeah, Ohio is that. And you mentioned the area you're in. We drove through there actually as we were heading out west back in August, and yeah, it's typical Midwest. It's flat. Yep. It's the corn. It's like, this is not where Bigfoot would be, in my opinion. It's all in the eastern and southern part, and that seems to be true. And then leading down to West Virginia, the mountain state, obviously tons of great habitat. You would have hiked through there on the AT as well, and it's plenty of sightings and other weird stuff. West Virginia is just a cryptid paranormal magnet, but there's a lot of Bigfoot stuff there too. So yeah, Ohio is awesome. I love going to Ohio, and Small Town Monsters is based out of Ohio. So whenever I'm over there, obviously it's fun. But even in the past, going there and seeing some of those areas, and the Ohio Bigfoot Conference is the largest Bigfoot conference in the country, and I've been to that once, and a lot of fun. So Ohio is definitely very squatchy.
Yeah, it's so weird because like Ohio has all this stuff that nobody knows about, and it's kind of wild because like it's the least like thought of state in the world. I think I don't know, like everybody's like Ohio. There's so many memes of like Ohio sucks, and it's just so funny.
Right.
I don't know, like just to me it cracks me up because there's all these like centers of things based out of Ohio, and I don't know why. I don't have a good reason for it, but whatever. So one thing that I'm always curious about is you spend, probably compared to the average person, inordinate amount of time, not only in the forest and the woods, out in the field, but you're out there specifically looking for Bigfoot. So what's, on a personal level, what's the most wild thing you've ever had happen to you? Like just out, either whether you're researching or not, just being out in the woods, it's just wild. Even if it's not Bigfoot, like getting eaten by a bear or something, I don't know.
I mean, oh man, there's so many, not only before Beyond the Trail. I just love to go out in the woods. I mean, I was just out in the woods yesterday, changing out my SD card I have on a trail camera that I used to try and find moose, and I had a big old bear across this little tiny branch over a creek because I had put the camera facing the creek. I knew stuff was crossing there, and it happened to be big. I was expecting a fisher or something small, but a big bear just used it. So I try to get out there as much as I can, and I genuinely love being out there, whether or not we're filming stuff or even Bigfooting, just being out there in general, whatever. But man, we've had some weird stuff. I guess I'll give you two Bigfoot related that I think of, and I'll give you two non-Bigfoot related. So I'll start with the non-Bigfoot ones. The one of the weirdest things I ever had happen was in Pennsylvania, actually, where we saw this UFO that was absolutely defied explanation, and weirdest thing I've ever seen. I've not seen Bigfoot. I've only heard noises, but we're basically investigating this property that's in this area that has a lot of high strangeness, strange sightings of black helicopters, UFOs. Mm-hmm. I was primarily interested in the property, and some friends of mine have been investigating for quite a few years, and I've known other investigators that have gone in that same area, because there's just an abundance of Bigfoot sightings and UFOs and weird stuff. People having missing time, shadow people, all kinds of really creepy stuff. I mean, I was primarily interested in the Bigfoot stuff. I didn't really care so much about the other, the weirdness, right? I opened my eyes to it a little bit afterwards and kind of reconsidered. But we were just out there. Second year I'd been there, and we were out sitting in this field in this completely clear night. I mean, it's very similar to the terrain I was talking about in Ohio, where you have rural properties and farms and people living there, and then patches of woods, and then more farms, and then more patches of woods, and ravines that connected all that the animals move through. And there was a great property there that was connected to this family where they were seeing 3 generations of people were seeing Bigfoots, the grandmother, the son, his daughter. They were all seeing weird stuff and having weird stuff go on. But we were sitting out in this field one night after doing some Bigfooting out in the woods, and clear sky, and all of a sudden we see this, what looks like a cloud kind of hovering in the air, but it has almost like a light inside of it, illuminated. It's like a leaf in slow motion meandering. And I'm like, that is kind of weird. A beautiful clear night. We had one of those apps, and we had some people that were into astronomy with us, and guys who do UFO stuff. So ufologist kind of guys. Mm-hmm. I don't really do that, but that was, that they were there for that. Yeah. They were looking it up, and they couldn't find it on satellite, because you could look up with these phones and find it'll show you exactly what satellite is moving or, what's going on, if it's a plane or something, and couldn't find this thing on there. And it just kept moving in this really weird motion. And all of a sudden, a smaller, brighter light flies out of it and into it at a really rapid pace. And we're all at this point freaking out and trying to film it with our phones. It's not working. Of course, I had a fixed 10 millimeter lens on my camera that I was using for astrophotography. So it was completely useless at that distance. But one of the guys managed to make it back and grab a night vision camera and had recently been gifted it and didn't even know how to use it, but managed to film this thing as it was moving. And in the footage, you can see this larger undefined object and a smaller object kind of moving parallel and then becoming one. And it's very wild. I mean, it was weird. Like I said, strangest thing I've ever seen. Don't know what it is. I don't know if it was aliens. I mean, it's truly just a UFO by definition, unidentified flying object. Yeah. So what that is, I don't know. I mean, it could be secret government technology for all we know, but it was the strangest thing. And, I grew up flying. My grandfather was a pilot. I fly drones a lot. So I know a lot. I pay attention to stuff that's going on in the sky. This was unlike anything I've seen in terms of the way it behaved. So very weird. Again, not Bigfoot related. Yeah. Another non-Bigfoot related story, and this one's a little shorter, was out actually when we were filming Beyond the Trail, Bigfoot Mountain, the Oregon episode, the most recent one, Mount Hood. We went to the spot that Connor Anderson and Cliff had recommended. Connor took us to the spot where there's a long history of Bigfoot sightings, great reports out of there. That area, that county, Clackamas County in Oregon, has the most amount of Bigfoot sightings basically in all of Oregon. It's right kind of on the edges of Mount Hood. Amazing wilderness. So we get to this spot and we're setting up camp and there's these people sort of fishing. And I'm like, oh, what are these guys doing? And as it gets darker, we start seeing kind of lights. There was a fire ban. And we start seeing these torches in the woods and in a circle. And, this guy pops out of the woods and is kind of surveying our camp. And he looks super, super sketchy and weird. And we were like, whoa, this is something weird. So I start zooming in with the camera and I see tiki torches on. And we go to the car that they had parked. They had some sort of satanic symbols hanging in the mirror, and we were like, when's the chanting going to start? So we decided to pack it up and go to a different spot because we want to be in a spot that's pretty off the beaten path and be alone and see if anything Bigfoot related goes on. We don't want to be dealing with whatever rituals going on. I mean, do your thing, but especially at that time, there's a fire ban. It's kind of not maybe the smartest thing they should have been doing.
Yeah, for real.
But I know a lot of the stories about satanic cults from the Bridgewater Triangle of Massachusetts and a lot of the weird sacrifice stuff. And we were just kind of freaked out, but it just goes to show a lot of the times what you worry about out there is not necessarily the wildlife or something like a Bigfoot. It's the people, and that's why I'm usually armed when I'm out there. Just kind of a peace of mind thing. Some people like to, some people don't. And, I say, well, hey, I mean, if anything, it's a deterrent just in case you run into some weirdos out there because you never know. But I thought that was funny because that was probably the strangest thing that happened that whole trip. Looking for Bigfoot. We're the weirdos looking for Bigfoot. Yeah. There's this thing going on that kicked us out. And then the two Bigfoot related stories. I mean, there's so many things that I think probably were Sasquatch related, and I've never had a sighting, but had some weird stuff happen. I've been out with a lot of really great researchers that are pretty amazing. I mean, we were in the nest site that they've discovered in the Olympic Peninsula 5-6 years ago with the Olympic Project. That's going to be in the new On the Trail of Bigfoot, the Discovery, and Beyond the Trail. And it's these nest sites that they found that primatologists have looked at and said, this looks like something that primates have made, and it's unbelievable stuff. So I've been really lucky to be out there with a lot of people way more knowledgeable than me about the woods and about this topic. And there really are no Bigfoot experts. There's just people who know more than others. Mm-hmm. And I've just been blessed to be on the shoulders of giants a lot of the times. But this past summer, an experience I had, ironically, while on my way to Champ Day, which was a Lake Champlain monster-themed event. I was with my buddy Carrick St. Laurent, who's another cryptozoology kind of filmmaker and researcher from New Hampshire, awesome guy. And we decided to camp in the spot my brother recommended in the Green Mountains of Vermont, just on our way. We're going from southern New Hampshire to Port Henry, New York. Just decided to stop late at Friday night. We get to this camp and we put out a pheromone chip. I'm like, hey, this is a cool spot. Like, whatever, let's put it up. And then we did some wood knocks. We went to sleep. That morning, I was woken up by 3 wood knocks which are basically when something knocks on trees, and Sasquatch is reported to produce wood knocks, and something we actually know chimps have used as a communication tool. They throw rocks at trees or bang trees. If there's one chimp in one area, it's, they don't have cell phones, right? They're not texting each other. They've got to communicate some way. So there's been, I've experienced plenty of wood knocks out there, and some are more ambiguous than others. You get a power knock. It's no doubt that there's either a human being or something with an opposable thumb that's banging on a tree. But so we did a few wood knocks that night. We go to bed. I get woken up by those wood knocks. Carrick goes up and uses the bathroom a little bit after that. He comes back. We hear one more wood knock, and it's just like 7 a.m. We're kind of like, okay, interesting. All of a sudden, to the right of where our tent was, and we didn't have a rain fly on because it was beautiful sky the night before, and I always like to have the rain fly off if I can.
Yeah.
Or just cowboy camp. But we had 7 or 8 different objects basically get thrown at us from this very thickly wooded area, and you could hear the branches snapping as these what sounded like rocks. I mean, I was actually at that camp spot this past weekend with my brother, and we recreated. The only thing that came close to matching the sounds were rocks, and we could see from the thick patch of woods that you couldn't see 10 feet into. You could just see leaves in an arch pattern moving and branches as this thing was tumbling and tossing, and about every 15 to 20 seconds another object would come, and we could see it rolling a little bit on the ground as well. We're kind of just sitting up like, what the heck? I have my audio recorder rolling, so we have the audio of everything. And when it ended, basically 8 different objects came towards us. And I don't know how a squirrel could have possibly done that, or just there was no wind. There was nothing that was producing something, and they weren't falling straight because I was looking up at the tree where we had heard a squirrel. And you would see if it was falling down a straight pattern that the branches up at the top would be moving. These things were moving 30, 40 feet into the woods where you'd first see the leaves start parting and then objects coming down and tumbling and tossing. And we get out of the tent, we start going into the woods, and we hear a few more objects, and we kind of are stumbling around trying to get our bearings. We go back to camp. We start moving to the area where possibly these things could have been thrown from, and there was nothing there. But it was a grove of trees. So, it was really, really interesting. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I've had things possibly thrown at me before, but this was definitely pretty unambiguous as to there was stuff coming at us, and we were completely both awake. 7 a.m. We could see, it was pretty light out, and it was just extremely thick in that area. So something conceivably was up in that up on this ridge. You could get away really quickly. When my brother recreated throwing some stuff out, it took him quite a bit to throw some of these large rocks from the distance where we saw it first started moving from. And apes are a lot stronger than humans. So conceivably, let's say these things do throw rocks, and that's something that's commonly reported. Intimidation techniques, and never to hit people, but always kind of in the general vicinity, reported for hundreds of years across North America. So I don't know. It was definitely weird. So
that would freak me out, dude.
I can share one more if you want me to share one more.
Yeah, you could talk 3 hours if you want. I'm having a great time.
This one's also a fresh one. So this happened. So that rock incident happened in July, and it was completely coincidental. As I said, we had to pack up and leave pretty early the next morning, but we were still kind of like, what the heck was going on? After that happened, and I've been back there twice now to try and recreate it, and nothing really. I mean, this past weekend when I was camping there, we did have some stuff moving around, but there was owls and there was probably other animals right in the area. But the other one happened actually while filming Beyond the Trail. We were in Utah. We were in the high Uinta Mountains of Utah, which is probably one of the most amazing places I've backpacked. Just so beautiful. You have these extreme, high altitude kind of lakes, beautiful colors, from all the glacial stuff and the blue. So we were up at this lake, and in the mountains, you're basically tucked in these huge valleys, and you've got either 14,000 footers or anything above 10,000 feet right above you, because you're already at the 10,000 foot mark. And we were going in there backpacking for a few days, Eli and I, filming Beyond the Trail. Mm-hmm. I was thinking, what are the chances? I've heard there's been reports in these areas, but it's a pretty big mountain range. You do have these valleys that you're kind of confined to. There's a lot of moose and other stuff in these valleys that we saw evidence of, but I didn't think much was going to happen. But, the first night we kind of got a late start. It was about 5 or 6 p.m. when we started hiking. We had 6 miles to hike to get to the lake where we wanted to be. And it was a 10,000 foot elevation. So it was definitely kicking our butts a little bit. Yeah. We're about 5 miles in, and it's already dark. Trail's getting miserable. We're in the middle of the woods. It's muddy, watery, rocky. We're singing, goofing off, no cameras rolling, just kind of trying to get to the location. Because when you're not filming, you got to actually be trying to get to the spot. Yeah. And we're just walking. All of a sudden, to the left of me, I just hear this loud bang, like a tree fell over or something snapped. Immediately stops us. We start rolling the camera, take our packs off. We're like, okay, we do some wood knocks, wait a few minutes, turn our lights on. As soon as I turn the light on, behind us, we hear what sounds like another 2 little wood knocks. So we're like, okay, what the heck? Turn the lights off again, do some knocks back. It was almost like every time we turn the lights on, that's when something happened. Another few minutes goes by, we turn our lights on. And to the left of us, where the original sound had stopped us basically dead in our tracks, these 2 loud, and it was just very weird. And I'm like, what are the chances? So we set up camp basically in that spot, a little bit off the trail. And I don't know, I still have to review that audio, but I don't know if anything else happened. But a few mornings after that, we also I did some knocks and I got some responses, and we basically walked up into the mountain, and there was almost nobody else in that entire valley. The only other camp was about a mile or 2 up, so they weren't anywhere near us. And we went off the trail. We hiked for about half a mile off the trail on some terrain, and I did some knocks, and we heard it coming from the other direction and got some responses. And then I basically ran to that direction, trying to see if we could see what it was, but it was already gone by then, if that's what it was. I mean, it was just really weird, because here we are, we're filming a Bigfoot documentary, and we have something happen. I mean, trying to be devil's advocate and be skeptical of myself, and say, I really thought we'd have nothing happen. It would just be a great documentary. We talk about the sightings, show this amazing valley where, there's other large animals living, like moose and elk. And, what are the chances? And apparently, we had, I don't know, I can't say it was Sasquatch, of course, I didn't see it, but it was definitely unusual. And I don't know, we have the audio was so loud that you could hear it on camera. So it was pretty intriguing.
Well, so when I watch all the stuff you guys do, and you go out and you set up these camps in these super remote places, I mean, you've been, more places obviously than just what's been filmed already, because it's a continual process. But I mean, you're out at like Oregon, you're in California, you're in Maine, New Hampshire, all these super remote places. And it's usually between 1 to 4 guys with you, if that.
Yeah. Very small amount. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're out there, the only thing I could think of is that it's literally terrifying. But is that something that is that part of the process, or is that something you get used to? Because it's one thing to just be a dude camping like me. I'm out there backpacking, having a good time, just doing my thing. And to have an encounter or something like this happen, it's another thing to have that encounter happen while you're looking for it, and then to get out of your tent in the dark and go run after something. I mean, that's a whole new ball game. Is that just kind of something how do you feel in those moments? Are you oh shit, or are you just stoked, or a mixture, or...
I think it's a little bit of a mixture. I think I'm definitely more, once that adrenaline starts pumping, I might make a decision that I probably wouldn't otherwise, let's just run. Let's just go this way. It's fine. Right. No, I don't know. I don't usually get too freaked out there. I mean, I love being in the woods. So even at night, it's a calming feeling. It's amazing. And it really puts into perspective us as human beings, how we're not in control. You put us out there in the woods at night. That is the domain of the creatures that live out there, and not us. As much as we pretend to be the masters of this environment, whatever human arrogance we have, it's humbling. And no, I don't know. It's just, I think once you've had certain things happen, you're always yearning for more. I always joke about it with people, and they're like, "Oh, well, you see one, you're going to wish you hadn't seen it, because they're pretty terrifying to see." And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, until it happens, if it does happen, a lot of people don't, a lot of people do. A lot of people I've talked to, it's been very traumatic. Others say, it was a blessing to see it, and that either sends them on a path of wanting to see it again, or researching the rest of their lives. Yep. So it's, I don't know. It's interesting. And like I said, I don't really get freaked out there. I'm actually more scared of probably being in a haunted asylum or something with ghosts. I don't want anything getting attached to me, or weird paranormal things. I'm much more comfortable with being out in the woods, Bigfoot. And as I mentioned earlier, I think people are probably the freakiest thing out there. You never know. And, I've had some close calls with animals. We've had, moose run past our tent at 6 a.m. in Maine, and you can see the silhouette coming over and feel the vibrations. And
scary,
you're gripping a shotgun and thinking, please do not come through this tent right now. And it's humbling. I mean, I love seeing those animals. I love seeing the evidence that they're there. whether it be tracks or anything like that. And, when you're searching for something as elusive as Sasquatch, we scour these fields and look for footprints and other evidence. And, usually you don't turn up with much. And if these things are either rare or, not very common, that would make sense. And they're clearly the masters of the environment, and outclass us many times over, and probably are way more patient than we are in terms of being able to sit still like statues and wait until they have an opportunity to move. A lot of animals are like that, but I'd imagine a primate or something with higher intelligence even more so than a moose or a big animal like that. So yeah, I don't know. It's not super freaky. I think it's more of a sense of adrenaline. I love being out there, and I love being in some of these remote areas because, like, as I mentioned, you have to rely on yourself, and you get to see the true wilderness. Most people stay on the trails and hike in areas, and there's beautiful places like that to check out. But, we're taking it one step further and just getting out there. And, it's, I wouldn't really do it any other way if I could, I suppose. And, and that's one thing is going to these places, but there's also places we go to where it's not that far from civilization. Like in Ohio, you've got properties that have activity. So people think the Sasquatch phenomenon is just out in these way remote woodlands. And that's true. But I think that, possibly the Sasquatch in these remote areas are only used to seeing humans that are out there either backpacking or camping. So there's maybe more of a chance of something happen. Whereas if you live close to civilization, let's say, there's reports of Sasquatch digging through dumpsters and stealing out of people's gardens and greenhouses, all kinds of stuff. They kind of adapt their behavior, maybe a little sneakier. And there's evidence that animal species within a generation can adapt their behavior based on changing environmental factor. So I just think the Sasquatch, perhaps in more remote areas, there's more of a chance of provoking some kind of response because they're not really used to techniques. And if you go to Salt Fork State Park, people have done every research technique out there because it's been a squatching hotspot for 20 years. So these things, if they're there, they're probably used to every trick in the book, and maybe they're just having a good laugh at the humans. Like, here they come wood knocking for the 100th time. We're putting out the pheromone chips. So we'll give them a little whoop and kind of tantalize them a little bit. Who knows? If they are, related to us, they're probably curious and they're tricksters. And that seems to be, a lot of the elements is a lot of reports I've heard, juveniles that seem to kind of be trying to get close to humans or mess with them and do kind of nefarious things because it's probably entertaining. If you're out in the woods all day, you got to stay entertained too. They don't have YouTube or anything like that. So it's, you have to kind of look at it from that perspective, I guess.
Yeah. And that's it is funny because we're all so wired in all the time, myself included. This is what I do every day. So it's like,
right.
You go out in the woods and it's just like, that's it. There's never cell service. Like I would say like 50% of the time there's no cell service. I was gone last weekend for 3 days, no cell service. Greatest 3 days of my life. It's an amazing
feeling. It's so good.
And if you have time, I was going to ask you about your gear because it kind of separates you in a way being a filmmaker on top of out here looking for this because you're essentially equipped for this situation. You have a camera in your hand, you got night vision, and I have the camera equipment to go out and do something like this. I've been debating it for a long time. It's a time commitment issue at this point in time for me. But I want to trust me. It's on the agenda. And the thing is like, okay, you got the lens. I got the zoom lens. I got the 600 millimeter. I got the 50. I got the the wide angle for all the cool nature shots and this and that. And then I think the missing gear I have is like night vision. I have literally in front of me, I have like 6 or 4 boom mics or shotgun mics. I have the mics covered, man. But night vision and gear. I'll just make it easy. If you go out in the woods, you have a limited supply you can carry, obviously. What are you bringing with you? You can get brand specific if you want. You can just keep it basic. That's up to you. But I'm always interested in that because I'm a camera nerd.
Or just like a whole loadout. Yeah.
What do you bring? Like if you're going to shoot a doc, what do you take with you?
Yeah. So when we're doing, the documentary side of it, obviously if we're traveling for a few days or a couple of weeks, as we've done at times, we've got the whole kit, tripods, everything, because we do a lot of these sit-down interviews. We do filming. We try to highlight the local museums. So far, we've pretty much covered almost every major Sasquatch museum in the country, except for a few of them, which we're hoping to get to, whether it be Cliff Barrickman's Museum in Oregon or the China Flat Museum in Willow Creek, California, the Colorado Sasquatch Outpost, that'll be in the upcoming episode, the International Cryptozoology Museum in Maine, all these places. So we do a lot of these interviews where we're going around getting B-rolled and that sort of stuff. So that's the typical filmmaking stuff you're going to have, mics, all that stuff. But when we're going out in the woods, especially if it's backpacking, I usually keep it to, it's usually me and Eli. We're kind of a team on this. I'm bringing out one of my Sony, the Sony A7, and I have got I don't even know what my lens is, but it's like I like something that I can get pretty good medium and also a little bit further if I need to, just get a little bit of focal length, just play with it a little bit. Obviously we'll also have a handy cam, because sometimes the Sony is, they're not the best for that. Handy cam, the Sony handy cams, you just pop it open, it's ready to roll. So that's for like quick stuff that we really need going on.
Is that how you're getting your night vision too? I was curious about that.
Yes. Yeah. So night vision is by Sony Handycam, and we actually throw an IR torch on the top, and then we'll just have a mic on top of the IR torch. So, you have the IR on the camera itself, but you give it a torch and it gives you so much more range. And that's just, when we're trying to film each other in the dark, explaining stuff, we'll turn that off when there's stuff going on, because a lot of people say, well, these things might see IR. And let's say there was something moving, like, okay, hit it now with the IR, then, you know what I mean? So, so those are the two cameras that we're primarily using, but we do use a lot of GoPros as well. So all the GoPro series, they're great. I've been using GoPros for years. I think the one we have now is probably the 8 that we're using. Yeah, they're so great and great. We just love doing it. Like when we're setting up camp, right? We want to show time lapse of us just setting up the tent or getting some water, cooking food. Just throw the GoPro on. Yep. And then one really big important thing is audio. So my go-to audio recorder is the Zoom H1N. These guys are awesome. I love these things. I use these all the time in the field. Whenever I'm camping, I always have one running either outside the tent or just hanging in the tent in case you get audio. A lot of the stuff you get Sasquatch related is audio wise. And these guys are great. And then, if I got to do an interview, I can just hook a lav mic up right into here. I don't have to bring the big bulky Zooms. Those things are great. And we have used those in the past, but those are, obviously these are so much more portable, and you can have 2 or 3 of them and you can stick them in different areas around camp. So that's hugely important. And in terms of night vision, we've used quite a few different night visions, but I prefer thermal imaging. So FLIR thermal imagers. So for FLIR, which is forward-looking infrared, the stuff's been around for a while, military law enforcement usage, and they have some great handhelds that basically show you heat signatures, show you what's going on. And I've gotten footage of tons of other animals at night with these things, and I know a few people who have gotten some pretty convincing Sasquatch thermals with FLIRs, and so that seems to be a pretty effective tool. It doesn't give off IR. It's very small. Some of the little handheld ones, or you can get the binocular ones, they get pretty pricey, but I've had the fortune of being able to use some of those out in the field. They're amazing. And those are I think a little bit better than some of the traditional night vision that people think of, because infrared is different with the heat signatures and everything like that. If something's there, you will definitely see it because it's going to be giving off heat. So there's a lot in the kit, a lot more little tiny things, but that's the main kind of gear. And obviously drones. So the DJI Mavic series, we've used quite a few of those guys, and they're so portable. I've been using drones for 4 or 5 years now, and I used to have the Phantom, and those guys were great. I used to take that backpacking, but now you get the little Mavic and just stick it right in there, and you get 4K footage. And not only is it great in terms of getting cinematic shots, you can survey a mountainside or a camp and say, whoa, I had no idea there's this giant boulder over there. Let's go check that out, and find it. And so it's a great tool in terms of the research. But when we're out there, we're not just doing research. We're also trying to put together a film that's watchable, that you've got lots of great footage that shows the nature. And that's one of my favorite parts of it, is most of the time we don't have anything Bigfoot related go on, but I love being able to show how remote and rugged some of these areas are. And, as you were talking about earlier, a lot of people don't know unless they've been out there. And I keep getting people telling me, I had no idea New Hampshire, Maine was this rugged. I had no idea that, Bluff Creek was that far in, all that kind of stuff. Or, wow, that's the best I've ever seen, the Mount Hood area. It kind of helped me inform myself for a trip I'm going there on. So I get comments like that, and that really makes me happy, because I'm just trying to show what it's like out there in the field. And we just have fun doing it. Even if we're just at the end of the day doing it for ourselves, I guess, we're trying to take the research seriously. We're not just goofing off. We do goof off, and that's part of it. You're out there in the woods for weeks at a time with your friends. You get into arguments. You all kinds of stuff happens, and it's just part of being out in the field. It happens if you're Bigfooting or not. So it's just we try to show it all and take these subjects and show them in a serious light, because there's a lot of people who have legitimate experiences, and there's a lot of great researchers and people documenting these stories and trying to kind of raise the bar in terms of the research. So hopefully we can showcase that. If not, we have a lot of fun along the way.
Well, you guys do a great job of, it looks like you have fun out there. And like, as someone who's filmed a ton in the outdoors, it's not easy because it's always something. It's always fogging lenses or you open a bag and you drop, I have my camera bag right here. You drop a piece of equipment and you're like, well, there went everything. Like it's not so simple.
It's scary.
Yeah. And it's like, it is a ton of work. And I think
these guys,
yes,
Pelican
amazing.
cases for SD cards.
For everything.
It's you could throw this at a tree, it'll be fine.
And
seriously.
Well, that's the thing too, is like someone like me, I have a job, but it's not like I'm not making millions of dollars over here. So every piece of equipment I have is a hard earned. And if you break that, if water gets in that $2,000 camera, I mean, that's it.
I know. Yeah. And I've ruined cameras out in the field before and, that I've bought and, a lot of the equipment I use, of course, a lot of the stuff we do, it's crowdfunded. So people are helping us kind of get out there and do this stuff. So, we're not some huge network TV either. We don't have the type of budgets that the Travel Channel or Discovery does. So we're working with a razor thin budget and just trying to make it work and talking to friends and having people that we know be, in these programs and help out and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely when it comes to equipment, it's important to have the right stuff, but also to take care of your stuff. And, I always say, we're not only out there backpacking. It's one thing to just go out there backpacking. You got all your gear in a heavy pack, but then you've also got the Bigfoot research equipment on top of it. And then on top of that, the camera gear. So we're almost carrying way more than we would if we were just normally going out there for, a weekend out in the mountains or whatever. So I'm not saying that to toot our own horn or anything, but that's just part of what goes into it. It's kind of it's a process and we like it so far. And, I'd be doing it anyway, even if I wasn't filming it. Exactly. So this just gives us the opportunity to go to some pretty cool locations I've always wanted to go to. And we've got some pretty cool episodes coming up too.
I'm so excited. I get so excited to watch every new one that comes out because you guys, it's like, I feel like I'm just in there like, oh shit, I want to be there so bad, like doing this stuff. And it's really cool because like someone like, me, I don't get to experience that stuff that often. You guys are in these remote places. And that's why I'm a huge fan and advocate of, even in lieu of people saying that they don't agree with it, taking people who can't go to these places out there with you.
Right.
So I think that's super important because even on a conservation ethic, you're showing people wild places that they can't or won't go. And that appreciation, my goal is to build that appreciation over time, whether it's talking about dudes hiking 10,000 miles in a year or people out there searching for Bigfoot or just talking about conservation. I love all of that stuff, but I don't want to keep you all night. We've already had so much awesome conversations and stuff. And as a filmmaker, I know you probably don't get that much free time because you're always editing or filming or something.
I should be editing right after this is over. But if I can just add one quick point about what you talked about and what's great about what you do as well is you're talking to, I mostly talk to Bigfoot people or people who are obviously interested in Bigfoot, but I love talking to all those other folks as well. And that's something you're doing is the common theme we have, whether or not we're trail runners or loggers or Bigfooters, is we're all using the land. And if we don't take care of it, I mean, it's not going to be there for other people. And, whether it's leave no trace or whatever philosophy you have about, approaching the outdoors, these are wild places. They're amazing. And I hope that I can inspire people to get out there and appreciate it. And, we saw in 2020 with the world kind of shut down, people going to the woods like never before. And I heard a lot of horror stories of people who had never been out in the woods before and seeing some of these camps and the trash and everything. So I really hope that we can at least do a little bit of educating in terms of, the outdoors are there, they're amazing, but let's kind of take care of it and make sure we have it so all the other people and the hikers and everyone else can get out there and enjoy it too. And, I personally think that these things are out there and they live on the land. So that is a big, important thing for myself and a lot of people to research is, not just Sasquatch, but moose, I keep bringing moose, one of my favorite animals, all these other animals and incredible species that are out there. We want to make sure that keeps going on. So, hopefully we inspire people to think about it and, kind of enjoy the environment because that's all of ours. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are, where you're from. The woods are the same. And if you're out there, if you respect the woods, it'll respect you. If not, I mean, it's just unfortunate.
I couldn't have said it better myself, man. So I want to thank you for taking this hour and a half almost for running here, which hell yeah, dude, I'm stoked about that. But before we wrap up, why don't you let people know like your website, where they can find out your documentaries, buy stuff, sell stuff, whatever you want, man.
For sure. Yeah, the best place to find me is petakovmedia.com. That's PETAKOV media.com. I've got a store on there, also links to all the docs and everything, including Beyond the Trail, which is all also Small Town Monsters. That's who we do it with. And, we work on a lot of the other productions, and Small Town Monsters has a ton of other cool documentaries. So go check them out. But my website also has links to my YouTube channel, Sasquatch Out of the Shadows. I do a weekly live stream on there Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we talk to different Bigfoot researchers and people all around, and just kind of discuss experiences, all that sort of stuff. We have fun with it. So yeah, my website, Petakov Media, or through Small Town Monsters. Those are probably the two easiest ways to check out some of our stuff.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I would love to chat again sometime.
Anytime. Just let me know.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching this episode of the Aptitude Outdoors podcast here on YouTube. If you can, help me out. Go down below. Hit that subscribe button. I want to take a minute here to thank Aleks for coming on. He's such an awesome dude. Not only an awesome outdoorsman, he just understands the woods and the outdoors, but he's also a really interesting guy to talk to, knowledgeable guy about all this Bigfoot stuff. So check out his YouTube channel as well. It's called Sasquatch Out of the Shadows. And actually, right as I'm recording this, I'm about to go live on his channel. So by the time this podcast comes out, you can go over there. I'll put a link below in the description. You can check out our conversation as well. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.